My name is Elizabeth O'Neill, and I am the Executive Director of the TRIUM Global EMBA program. I'm based at the London School of Economics, but TRIUM's a partnership program, so I also work closely with our NYU Stern and our HEC Paris colleagues as well. Probably, in its simplest terms, a joint program or a consortium program really is what the terms imply. It is a program where two or more schools, in the case of TRIUM, it's three, come together to develop, establish, and then ultimately deliver a program. So I think it really is just about the collaboration between the different institutions. TRIUM has a 20-year history, so that decision to work together as a collaboration goes back so many years. I wasn't there at the time, but I think the decision really stemmed from this desire to deliver something that was greater than the sum of the parts. So each of these three schools, in our case, and I'm sure this applies to others, they're well established in their own right, but I think the power of coming together and complementing and integrating what other schools either specialize in or bring to the table is really just is something unique. So I think it just goes beyond what any one school can offer. For TRIUM, we use the word modules. There are 6 modules across the 18-month degree program, and it really reflects a concentration of time when the students are together physically. That's the standard mode of operation, although not always possible in this past year. The modules, in our case, they're 2 weeks at a time, so it's very concentrated physical study together. And then in between modules, students are doing self-study. They're working together in individual or in study groups or on capstone projects. So it's really a format of program delivery. And when people hear that word module. This may not be a technical definition, but when I think of a part-time MBA, I really think of the target audience being very similar to the full-time MBA, but it might be individuals that can't dedicate full-time. They might need to work alongside their studies, possibly a more domestic audience if you're looking at individuals who are working and then on evenings or weekends attending their classes. But again, I think the audience is likely to be a little bit more junior than at least what we see on the executive MBA programs. We are part-time study as well by definition, and that the modules allow an executive to work full-time and study alongside of that in modular format. But I think much more senior in the context, if I think of executive MBA versus part-time MBA. If someone's applying for the TRIUM program, there is a central team. We get the best of the 3 schools, and that's reflected in what we offer, but it's quite integrated from the marketing, recruitment, and admissions standpoint. That's all happens with a central TRIUM team. Program delivery, very much the same, the academic group, and then alumni as well. So you would be applying to the TRIUM program, and that team is drawn from the 3 schools, of course, by definition, but it is centrally administered. TRIUM's admissions committee is set up with senior representatives from all 3 schools. Everything we do at TRIUM involves all 3 schools and kind of a unanimous decision on an applicant. So we draw on that expertise from the 3 schools, but it is uniquely TRIUM in its format and in its process. When someone graduates from the TRIUM program, we like to think they get the best of 4 different networks and 4 different communities. So there is I'd say, relatively small but close-knit TRIUM alumni group. We're over 1,100 graduates from our past 20 years. And what's brilliant about that is it is global. It's in over 90 countries, but it's quite tight-knit so that there's an affiliation and affinity to TRIUM first and foremost amongst our graduates. And then there is this opportunity to tap into the alumni networks of the LSE of NYU Stern and HEC Paris. And students or graduates, depending on where they live, take advantage of that in very, very different ways. One would imagine if you are in France, where the HEC network, it's one of the places where it's quite strong. obviously that's where they're based, that you might tap into that in equal ways to the TRIUM community, ditto in New York or London. But really, these communities are so global. There's an opportunity to dip in and out, depending on how you might want to use these networks to advance your career or advance your opportunities, or shift or pivot, and then you can leverage all four. When we think about the TRIUM curriculum and what each school brings to the table, of course, there is something unique, and probably even 20 years ago, more distinctly so. I would say over the years, each of the three schools, in terms of their depth and breadth of what they can bring, has expanded in its own right. What we'd like to think, maybe in shorthand for what each institution brings to the table in TRIUM, is the LSE. That's probably the obvious one. It's the non-business school in the TRIUM group and in the TRIUM Alliance. And that is the ability, we go in depth when we're at the LSE on analyzing business through the geopolitical and socioeconomic lens. And that's really quite a unique, immersive experience. And I think so important for today's, addressing today's complex global challenges and this very interconnected world. So that's our starting point for every module. It's that immersive 2 weeks at the LSE. Then, NYU Stern, we know it's known as a financial powerhouse. That certainly is where we do the deeper dive into most of our financial topics: corporate finance, valuation with Professor Aswath Damodaran, which is a global and well-known name, credit risk with Ed Altman. So that is primarily what NYU brings to the table, although we also do strategy there. We do some of our ESG topics. There's so much to choose from. So we pick and choose, and it varies a little bit year on year. HEC Paris, a powerhouse in their own right on strategy, strategic marketing, and corporate strategy, some of these other topics that they bring to the table. And they also have really put a stake in the ground in terms of entrepreneurship, and Station F, based in Paris, they're a big part of that initiative. So we're lucky in that we get to choose. There was probably a starting point for each of the three TRIUM institutions, but now they've each expanded their own portfolios so much that we really can draw on that and leverage that each year. I'm always amazed, although heavily involved in the process of the selection of the cohort, when we actually get to meet the TRIUMers each September when they start the program. Really is such an impressive group. There's over 1,000 years of experience in any TRIUM classroom. And so there's a peer learning component, of course, to anything they do. We really target the most senior cohort that we can. We have an average age of individuals of 40 and 15 years of experience. So I think that is at least a couple of years, and probably a couple of meaningful years higher than what might be standard across executive programs. And for us, that just translates into, as I mentioned, the peer learning, what they bring in to the classroom. And many are at a point in their career where they're looking to pivot. Perhaps they've done the corporate, worked up that ladder, and maybe they want to pivot into something more entrepreneurial, or indeed to the next step in their corporate career. So there's a broad range of aspirations and motivations, but I think seniority is a hallmark. I think diversity is probably the other one I would mention. Typically, there are 60 students in any starting TRIUM cohort. And then within that 60, when you see 25, 30 different nationalities, that is 25, 30 different experiences and points of view that are brought into the dialogue and the classroom debate. So it's pretty phenomenal when you see all of this at work in this ecosystem, and to see how that grows and changes and shapes the group or shapes any one cohort as they go through the program. So you can study about China's influence in Africa, or you can, look at what's happening in the entrepreneurial space in San Francisco or Beijing. But then you have students from those places, executives from those places, adding flavor to any conversation, which is pretty phenomenal to see in action. The cost of any executive degree program, in particular at a top program, it is an investment, absolutely. The current tuition for the TRIUM program is just over $185,000 US. And on top of that, students really need to consider travel cost, getting to modules and hotel and things like that, which are just part of that cost of attendance more broadly. So certainly something we ask candidates to think about. We believe the investment is worth it. A number of students, and I would say increasing numbers across all executive programs, and this is what we see at TRIUM as well, are self-funded. I think to a great extent that's by choice, where they might be looking for this education and this network and this knowledge to really allow them to pivot, perhaps outside of their current space. But we also see a steady commitment from organizations to they want to develop and retain their top talent, and this is a key way of doing that. So we certainly see a decent percentage every year of company-funded candidates, and we love to see that as well. I think what those organizations get by way of benefit is an immediate application of skills and knowledge and the peer learning that happens in the classroom, where many of the assignments or the projects that students are working on are about, how do you apply this strategy back to your organization, or take a challenge that you're working with in your field or in your external environment, and how would you apply the skills that you're learning in the classroom. So there's an applied sense to everything. There is this, we talk about 1,000 years of knowledge in the classroom, and then that translates back to organizations. So if you are looking for a global network, you're looking to expand your footprint as an organization, and now you have a top leader in this classroom with 60 individuals from 25 to 30 different countries, you have a way to tap into a global leadership network that you might not as an organization without someone being in this type of environment that really builds those bonds quickly. And I think an organization can leverage that very, very quickly as well. And I think the leadership skills that any one individual gains, it's a personal leadership journey, but there is also an emphasis on how they can apply that to their organizations immediately, to the teams that they manage, how they can apply the global mindset to everything that they do. And I think that's an immediate, students tell us, executives tell us, that's an immediate shift in the way they think and the way that they approach challenges and complexities in their workplace and in their organizations and even in their communities. We'd like to think that the transformation isn't just about the individual or the organization, that it really goes beyond that. The advice that I would give a candidate who's looking to approach their organization is one, start early. This isn't something, of course, in any organization with budget cycles being what they are and time commitments. Think through it, apply early. Of course, you'll understand, or a candidate will understand already, the decision makers. Is this something that comes through training and development or the HR side, or is this really about the C-suite making decisions for this kind of investment? I think we have information that candidates can share with their organizations when they're wanting to represent, how do we take what is the essence of TRIUM and translate that into the benefits for the organization. And I think it's important to put something in front of them so that they can really understand what the candidate sees and knows and anticipates will be the benefits. I think it's top talent shouldn't be taken for granted in organizations. So when you look at investing in that talent, I think all organizations are looking to do that. And it's really, I think you can, articulating that return in terms of immediate application in the organization, the leadership growth for the individual, and then how that just translates and permeates into teams. No organization can afford to stay stagnant or only have a very local or regional view. So if you can work with your organization to expand that global mindset, I think that's a winner. That's kind of a no-brainer in terms of return on investment. There are some elements of the TRIUM program that intentionally have remained the same. And by the same, I don't mean static. But if I look at the framework of TRIUM and why TRIUM was founded in the first place and the components of TRIUM, including the 3 partner schools, it was pioneering in its collaboration and the 3 schools that came together and what they brought to the table. So what we haven't changed is that unique element, in particular, that analyzing of business through the geopolitical and socioeconomic lens. So that framework hasn't changed, but of course, where we were 20 years ago, when it was really conversations about the advent of globalization, we look at globalization then and now, it's vastly different. So it's the topic or the focus on that is the same, but what that means is so very different over the last 20 years. So in a way, we evolve with the world around us, because what is unique about the TRIUM program is that we're looking at this interconnected world and we're looking at the global economy. And if that's your starting point, and we look how that has evolved, that's evolving by the minute now, those geopolitical forces and those complex global challenges. So it's enough with it that changes, and where our the academic research and the academic application and the business application of that evolves with it. At a practical level, within that particular theme, we are not running modules in the same places that we were 20 years ago. So of course, there will always be a module in London, in New York, and in Paris, in our 3 founding institution locations. But when we started, we were in Brazil and in Hong Kong. At one point, that involved to India and China. And at the moment, we are, in addition to Paris, New York, and London, we're in China and San Francisco. And I do expect that to evolve further as well. I would say another key theme that's coming in, and that was part of the move of one of the modules to San Francisco, and this was 4 or 5 years ago now, is obviously technological megatrends. There is no way that one can be contemplating global leadership without a deeper understanding of technology and its implications on the world in so many different levels. So whether that's fintech or cybersecurity or digital strategy or your digital consumer, that's another kind of red thread that I would say, we pull through. And then of course, over 20 years, thinking on leadership has evolved, thinking on ESG has evolved, themes around diversity, equity, inclusion, those have evolved. So we work really hard to capture that. And we'd like to think of ourselves as, we want to be on the cutting edge of the curriculum and the co-curricular activities for a cohort or a group of individuals that are on the cutting edge of where they are in their fields and their industries. And so that's what we always strive for. So I'd say there are many things that have remained the same, but you really have to move fast in a fast-paced world to make sure that you are current and you're ahead and you're adding value to a group of individuals who, let's face it, they're very good at what they do. They are already global leaders in some sense. So it's really making sure that we're constantly checking ourselves to add value in every way that we can.